I've never met my sister, but I know she was the most devastating moment of Dad's life. I have no memory of her, but I know she was born during the darkest time in our history, when Vietnam was freshly limping out of a decades-long bloody civil war, when food and medicine were mere luxury words brushed across the lips of the privileged. I have no photograph of her, but I can imagine the helplessness Dad felt, knowing that even if he had money, the communists still would withhold from him the medicine that could have saved her life, a price he paid for being the son of a defeated regime's officer. And so 33 years later, I found a little of what I know about her story as I was flipping through our family's Catholic sacramental book, deeply cut wounds inscribed in tearful blue ink on faded white paper. Nguyễn Thị Trường Chinh, born June 29, 1976, died December 11, 1976, the most devastating moment of Dad's life. My dad's handwriting can stop strangers in their tracks, and many times it has. I will never forget the time when one of our hired roofing contractors paused his lunch break to marvel at the exquisite penmanship he saw written on the dark green chalkboard that Dad had left from teaching his previous class. "Whose handwriting is this?" he inquired. "How can they write in such perfectly straight lines and such elegantly printed letters?" I was used to explaining to captivated new passerby that the owner of the book-worthy prints was my father. What I did not tell them was he perfected the art of chalkboard penmanship during the darkest days of his life, when the end of the war forced him to rebuild his career from the ashes of poverty and oppression, starting with working for scraps as a chalkboard advertisement painter on the war-torn streets of South Vietnam. No one has more influence on my love for books than my dad. Growing up in a humble 360 square foot home in Vietnam, we didn't have much, but the bookshelves were always well stocked. As a teacher, Dad said, "Books are your best friends, treat them well." And he always treated them like treasures. He made sure they were protected with book covers and taught us to never step on them or throw them on the ground. Sometimes in the few minutes of rest between his classes, he tried to sneak in a short power nap on the cold kitchen floor, his head pillowed on a stack of dictionaries. During the 10 years when the Communist Party was treating my dad like a political prisoner, those tattered books were his only source to build the knowledge that he would eventually use to rebuild himself from the ashes. And as he said, "With our knowledge we shall rise." My dad has an endearing habit of always soaking up every last drop of leftover soup broth in his bowl. He would add a scoop of rice to the bottom of his pho, or use a piece of baguette to scoop up the last few spoons of his bún bò Huế. Sometimes, to my mom's confusion, he would even crumble up a few pieces of Doritos chips to soak up the last few drops of the bún riêu soup at the bottom of his bowl. But I also recall a story he told me through misty eyes and suppressed indignation about one time during our years in Vietnam, as he was leaving a pho restaurant, he looked back and saw a beggar who had been patiently waiting outside, drinking the last drops of his leftover soup, and that image haunts him forever, and that is why, to this day, I make sure to drink every last drop of soup in my bowl. "I just want to make sure you know God is real," my dad earnestly explained from across the table of the local Waffle House diner. "So live your life accordingly, because we all have to answer to a higher being," he continued his lesson. This was a familiar weekly scene from the time I turned 13 to the day I left for college. Every Saturday, we would exchange philosophical banters while he passed down some of the wisest wisdoms I've learned over black coffee and hash browns. It was a continuation of the tradition he had set back in Vietnam when I was very little, when every dentist appointment was for sure to be assuaged by a follow-up trip to the ice cream parlor, where life lessons were passed down in between bites of sweet banana coconut frozen treats. I still carry with me those teachings learned over ice cream and Waffle House breakfast, thanks to the man who never thought I was too immature to learn the wisdoms and stories of my people. My dad raised me to be fiercely independent, just like him. After all, his name in Vietnamese literally translates to independent. But when it comes to my mom, this stubborn, self-made man who pulled himself up from the ashes of war and oppression, discreetly whispered to me during one of my petulant teenage moments, "I know your heart is as tough as mine, but your mother's heart is tender and delicate like a flower. She needs to feel needed." And that is why, whenever my mom is around, I still consult her on how much star anise I should add to my pho, and I attentively listen to her advice on how to correctly water my garden, even though I am more than a capable cook and gardener, because a wise and independent man once taught me that sometimes the toughest strength we can show is our ability to be tender to the most delicate of hearts. When we moved to the US in 1997, my dad had to restart his life over a second time after he had rebuilt his life from the ashes of a 1975 post-war Vietnam under communist oppression. This time, he restarted his life in the US as a toilet cleaner at La Quinta Inn, a far cry from the prestigious position he previously held in Vietnam as an English translator to the country's richest business professionals. His first vehicle in the US was a flea market bicycle. "If my children cannot have better than me, then they cannot have worse," he always clearly declared his why. And so in the winter of 1997 to 98, motorists in Tulsa, Oklahoma would regularly be perplexed by a frail man riding his old bicycle in the snowstorm, back from his third shift in the night, his tired eyes unyieldingly focused ahead on his why.